Hi, this is Dave at Two Stroke Performance. We're bringing you another quick video. This time we're talking about how to rebuild your YZ250 Powervalve. So that's a YZ250 cylinder. They haven't really changed in about the last 15 or so years. The Powervalve mechanism is definitely one of the more complicated ones out there. It's quite common for them to break if you install them incorrectly. And a lot of people aren't really aware, but there actually is a little bit of adjustment in the Powervalve which you can alter when you're setting it up, so I'll talk about that too. So first of all, I've got all the parts laid out in front of me. I'll go through them. Because there are a lot of parts in this Powervalve, I've laid them all out. I'll go through them all first with you so you can see what's what, and if necessary you can always rewind back to this part of the video just to have a look at all the individual parts, because there's a lot of nuts and bolts that at first glance kind of look similar, but they're all meant to go in specific areas. So here we go. So I'll just zoom back a little bit. So here's my bench. I've got all of these parts laid out. So starting here, I'll just grab a screwdriver to point with. This is our main flap. When you're installing it into the cylinder, as though you're looking at the cylinder exactly like this, you always install it with this, see this D cutout? That always faces upwards. If I flip it over, you'll see there's nothing on the back side. So you always install it so this D cutout is upwards. Now this particular one, if there's any keen viewers watching this, you would have noticed this one's actually broken. There is actually a small stop that's normally on the end of these. It's really common for it to break off, and often when it breaks off it'll sit around here in this cavity, and often it can jam the power valve up. So often if you get a YZ250 that's not running right, either the power valve will be jammed open or it will be closed. That's definitely one thing to check for. If the bike is otherwise starting and idling well, but either the symptoms will be either it will have really bad mid-range power and then suddenly hit very hard up top, or it'll be the opposite. It'll have good bottom end and mid-range, but then it will go very, very flat. So it's really common for the end of these to break off. You can see that one's broken off there. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to continue because it doesn't change what I do in the video, but just be aware of that. So the other parts in this assembly, this center section here has a washer either side of it. It has this small plate that sits on top with a 3mm head Allen screw that goes through it all the way through there. There's a spring either side, and then there are these little ramps, one on the left, one on the right. Both of those are held onto the main shaft here by 3mm Allen head bolts as well. So basically these 1, 2, 3 bolts go through the main shaft here, and all of these things along here slip onto this main shaft when it's all assembled. Now the ramps on each end, you can actually, these are specific, so one of them goes on the left, one of them goes on the right. If you get them the wrong way around, the power valve won't work properly. So what you need to be careful of is when you've got it all laid out like this, in position, if you see, if I can just sit this thing up, maybe, you'll see here the correct orientation. See how there's a, try and move this to the side, I know it's a little bit hard to see. There's a long straight section of ramp from the front to a bit beyond the halfway point, and then there's a curve towards the back. It's quite obvious when you have these things in your hands, you'll see quite clearly, look out for the long straight section and then the shorter curve. The correct orientation is to have the long straight section to the outside of the whole assembly. So this one on this side, I've got the long straight section to the outside here, and if I go over to the other side, the same thing again. You can see the screwdriver's magnetic, it keeps picking these things up. You can see there, I'll just try and get some better light. It's quite hard with these videos because you're often dealing with quite small little parts. So you can see once again, it's got the long straight section, and then behind it there's a short little curve. Try and get that directly from on top. Hopefully you can see that. There we go, that's probably a better view. So yeah, long straight section and then short curve. So the long straight section is to the outside. If I had this the wrong way around, if I pick the other one up and put it on this side, you know it's wrong because the long straight section here is now on the inside. So I hope that makes sense. I don't really know how else to explain it. If you do get it wrong, hopefully it will become obvious when the assembly is sort of back together, because it just won't work properly. These little side ramps are what open and close the side cylinders in here. They make those move in and out. So yeah, if you get those things in the wrong spot, hopefully it will become quite obvious that those side cylinders here aren't opening and moving outwards as the main flap pulls upwards. So anyway, moving along, just zoom out a bit. So yeah, so this is the main shaft. On the end of the main shaft, on the outside of the cylinder in here, you have a little retaining plate and a screw. That's just a Phillips head screw. Over here we have two, I don't even know what to call these, they're really retaining plates. The bottom one here actually sits in, I'll move some of these things, it actually sits in like that. The main shaft goes through it, and this piece here sits in the middle of it. I'll show you that more carefully when it's all going back together. But this main plate, when you put it into the cylinder, it screws into the retaining bolts for that plate, screw into there, and those retaining screws are 4mm head, Allen head bolts. The other retaining plate here, this one sits into the cylinder and screws into the top parts there. This retaining plate has these arms on the side. Now these arms are what go into the ramps here. There's a little pin on the underside of the arm that sits in the ramp, and so as the ramp moves backwards and forwards, it makes the arm move side to side. So that is what, these arms are what make the cylinders on the side of the power valve move in and out. Now, this plate here is held in place by two Phillips head screws with a small washer underneath. So that's all those pieces there. Carrying on, when we've got the power valve fully assembled, we'll put some covers on the outside here of the cylinders. There's one on the other side as well, just there. Those covers are held on with just standard Phillips head screws. The cover on the left side of the cylinder, so that's taken as though when you're sitting on the bike, this is the left side. The cover on that side is the one with the hose that comes out of it. It sits in there like that, and this barbed hose fitting is like a drain for the power valve. The other one here is the one for the opposite side of the cylinder, and it sits on there like that. And the other, I was about to say the final piece, but it's not. The other parts here, these are the cylinders themselves, which slide inside there, and they move in and out as the power valve opens. And it's a little bit tricky trying to do all this with one hand, but the plate here, see on the end of this arm there's a fork. That fork sits inside the cylinder, so that when this arm moves, the cylinder moves in and out. Then the final piece of the puzzle, when all of these bits here are all back together, the final piece is the top cover, which is held in place by four Phillips head screws. These ones are pretty ratty. I'll replace them before I actually send this cylinder back to the customer. So yeah, so these are, I've laid all this out just so that you can refer back to this part of the video if necessary, because it can be quite confusing trying to figure out exactly which components go where, you know, which screws are used in which spots. So hopefully that will help you. Now I'll get on with reassembling it. Okay, hopefully you have a good view there. So like any assembly, I've got a little cap full of two-stroke oil. The first thing that you put into place is the main flap. A bit of two-stroke oil on that. As I said before, make sure the D-shaped notch is sticking upwards. Slide it in. Now this is interesting. This cylinder here has just been replated. Often when a cylinder is replated, I'll try and show you this. This hole through here, which is where the main flat goes, often when a cylinder is replated, on the bottom edge of this hole, often you'll actually get the plating that will sort of creep up into that hole, and it actually makes the main flat bind. So you need to be really careful. If you've had a cylinder that's been replated, you need to make sure that this main flat goes all the way down and then smoothly pulls out again. Now I can tell you straight away, this one here's binding. In fact, I could almost that was lucky. I could almost push this in here and hold the whole cylinder just with the main flat. So this one here's binding. So what that means is that before I go any further, I need to stop the video. I need to use a rotary tool. Some of you guys might have Dremels or something similar, and I need to get right down in here and I need to just sand away at the fresh plating. Now I need to be really, really careful that I don't damage the bore when I'm doing that. So the area, hopefully you can see this, the area that I want to sand away at, is just, sorry, this is very hard to try and do this with one hand, is just along there. I don't want to touch the actual bore surface itself. I just want to touch the hole that the main Powervalve flap goes into. So I'm going to go away and do that now, and then I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I decided that I may as well just show you this process rather than hiding it, because a lot of you guys, if you're having your cylinders replated yourselves and doing the rebuild yourself, you're going to come across this problem. It's really, really common with power valves. Once the cylinder is replated, it's very, very common that the power valve will bind up and not work properly. So you'll go to all that effort of putting the engine back together after rebuilding it and replating it, and it just won't work properly. So I'll show you what I'm using here. So I've got, this is 120 grit sandpaper. I've got an attachment here. I've got proper porting tools, but you guys can pretty much use any. There's a lot of different things that you can use. So this is my porting tool, one of them. Yeah, you could use pretty much any sort of sanding bit. Here's another example, something like this. That's like a little sanding wheel. You need to get the right shape though. This one here is too big to actually fit down in that spot. This sandpaper works well because it will just, you know, bunch up to size, and I'll get it in. So hopefully you can see. I'll try and angle this. Going in there and working my way up and down just the bore that the power valve flap slides in along. I'm not touching the main bore that the piston goes up and down on. A little bit of sandpaper came out, so let's bring that back. Give that a try. Obviously, because I've just been sanding in there, there's a lot of little shavings. Clearly I need to clean that out. But straight away I can feel, this needs to be cleaned, but I can feel that it's just binding a little bit. If you can hear that click. Still binding a little bit at the end. Sometimes a little trick you can do is if it's binding like that, you can force it, like push it backwards and forwards over that spot where it binds, and sometimes you'll get little witness marks on the power valve flap itself, and that will then let you know where to grind. In this case I can't see anything, so I'll just keep sanding away for a bit. again. Yeah, that's good. As I said, it needs to be cleaned. There's grit in there, so I'll go and I'll clean it properly now. But that moves smoothly, and it seats all the way to the bottom as far as it'll go. So that's good. Let's go back to the other bench. Okay, so we're back again. I've just sorted out that small issue with the main flap. Just had to do a little bit of grinding in this area so that the main flap would seat properly, and that was simply resulting from having this cylinder replated. So that main flap now goes in there nice and smoothly. A little bit of oil on it, front and back. I've cleaned all these parts really well since grinding, using brake cleaner and compressed air. Everything's been blown out and rinsed and cleaned really well. So now that main flap moves nicely, it's in position there. Next thing I'll do is I'll take this retaining plate and the two Allen head screws that support it and put those in. Now they're 4mm Allen head, 4mm Allen head bolts. So I'm trying to do this so that you guys can see, but it's maybe not working that well. So now we've got the main flap in there with this retaining plate in place. The next thing to do is to take our main shaft and start feeding it in from the side, and as we do, all these parts here will go onto it one at a time until it's all the way through. One thing I should mention, I've already put a new seal in here, which is part of a top-end gasket kit. So yeah, put a new seal in there. A little bit of two-stroke oil on this main shaft, just all over it, and start feeding it in from the side. Just put it, a little way through, 10mm or so. Feed on the first ramp, then the spring, then between the end of the spring and the retaining plate goes the washer, and I'll lift this up and I'll show you. Hopefully you can see there, I've got the ramp sitting there, then I've got the spring there, and then on the end of the spring there's a washer, which is before the retaining plate. So it's to the side of the retaining plate. Hopefully you can see that. So then I've just put the centre part on. The two ends of the springs go onto the pins either side of the main flap, and then the shaft goes straight through this centre piece. While I'm holding this up, I'll show you. I'll then put the next washer on. If we can get it in there. So the next washer is just sitting in place there. Put the shaft through a bit more. You've got to just do this slowly, and then I can take the next spring and feed it on to the shaft. I'll get it in position. That's sort of sitting there. I can pull it back with my finger, and then the last thing to go on this shaft is the final ramp here. There you go, everything moves smoothly. I'll hold that up so you can see. So we've got ramp, spring, washer, then the retaining plate that we put in first of all, another washer, another spring, and another ramp there. Next thing to do is to take our 3mm Allen head bolts and put them in 1, 2, 3. I always start with the centre one. Now the centre bolt goes through this piece here, like that, and then then that goes in place. It's only in half a turn, then that goes in place on top of the main flap like that. Okay, I'll just backtrack a bit. Normally I put a little bit of blue Loctite on these small 3mm head bolts, so I'll do that now. So, put this centre one back on again. I always start with the centre one. And this one you can do up tightly straight away. There's no need to wait, just do it up. The two outside ones, we only do them up loosely and we leave them for the moment, and I'll explain that in more detail shortly. So I'll put these next two in and I'll just leave them there loose. Actually, sorry, I need to backtrack a bit. Before I put these outside ones in, I need to put this piece in. And before that piece goes in, I need to slip these cylinders in. So I put a little bit of two-stroke oil around those. It doesn't matter which way you put them in, left or right. Either one can go in either side. Now, something to look out for, when you're putting them in, you need to make sure that the slit here is oriented so that it points upwards like that, so that the arms of this retaining plate can reach down into it. When you're doing it, it'll be obvious. So you make sure that slit there is sort of pointing diagonally upwards like this, and just push that in by hand. Do the same thing on the other side. A lot of two-stroke, whoops, a lot of two-stroke oil. Put this one in the other side. There you go. Hopefully you can see that. Same thing again. So the slit there is pointing upwards. Put that in, and then you need to take this piece with it oriented like that, so the little pins here are facing downwards, and you need to put it into the assembly so that the forks on either end engage with the pins on the side cylinders here. It's one of those things that's hard to explain while I'm doing it. Hopefully you're sort of getting the gist. Talking about forks and pins and cylinders and all sorts of things, but hopefully when you're doing it, it will make sense. I feel like this one here is not in properly. Okay, so I'll show you this. So that plate there is now in place. I've got the pins that face downwards need to engage with the ramps here. Hopefully you can see that. So I've got that happening on both sides. The pins are engaged with the ramps. And so now it's time to do these two screws here up. So these screws that I'm talking about are just the standard Phillips heads, and they have a washer behind them. So that's done up now. So now we come back to these ramps and we finally put in the little 3mm Allen head bolts that mount these ramps to the main shaft. Just a little bit fiddly, I'll turn it back towards myself. Now, I'm not doing that up all the way. It's a little bit loose. And the same with this side here. Actually, before I go any further, I'm going to explain why I'm doing this. Hopefully, okay, if you can see that, you can see the hole there in the ramp that this little bolt is going through. It's actually elongated side to side. That's the adjustment I was talking about before, that not many people are really aware of. You can actually slightly, there's not much in it, there's only 1 or 2 millimeters. You can, because that's elongated there, you can change the position of this ramp side to side on the shaft. The reason why you do that is to ensure that when the whole system is in the closed position, you need to make sure that the cylinders are fully closed. If you tighten up these 3mm head bolts and the ramps are not located properly side to side on the main shaft, what you'll find is that the cylinders, when you look through the bore here, the cylinders won't actually be fully closed when the power valve is in the closed position. So I've left these 2 bolts here slightly loose at the moment, so I can move these ramps side to side a little bit. Now what I want to do is peer in here, and I hope that you can see this. Where are we? Yeah, I think that one works. Peer in here, and if you look in this port here, you want to reach your finger through, fully push that cylinder closed so that it's fully closing off that passage, and then come back here and tighten, and tighten up that 3mm head bolt. So then I'll do the same on the other side. Fully close the cylinder, so I've fully pushed the cylinder all the way through with my finger here. So it's fully, that port there is now fully closed. And then I come back to the front, and now I fully do up this one here. You can then put this retaining plate in. On this front side, the retaining plate there, and use the Phillips head screw or bolt to hold that in position. Technically, I actually should have put this retaining plate in before I tightened up those little 3mm head bolts, so I might just double check it. Just need to get myself some pliers. So the way to test this is to get some pliers on the end of the shaft and open it and close it. So the closed position is when this shaft is fully anti-clockwise, that way, and the opening of the power valve is when this shaft moves clockwise in that direction. It only moves about 90 degrees, so from there to about there. So that's the full range of motion. So what you want to do while you're moving this open and closed, just look inside the cylinder. So I'm looking down through here, and I'm making sure that the main flap is coming all the way down, and I'm also making sure that the 2 side cylinders in the closed position are fully closing. And I can tell you right now that this one on this side is not fully closing, whereas the one on this side is fully closing. So I need to go back and readjust the one on this side. So I'll loosen off this 3mm head, Allen head bolt, push the cylinder all the way in, and then I'll do it up again. And then I'll double check that. No, that one's still not wanting to close. It could be that there's, when I say it's not closing, it's staying open by maybe 1.5, maybe 2 millimeters. But that's enough to cost you a little bit of bottom end power. I'm just going to have another go. This time I'm going to push this ramp all the way to the outside, like that, before I do up this. And see if that is any better. Sometimes you just need to play around with these things. Yeah, that's better. It's still open a little bit, less than 1 millimetre I'd say, but that's pretty good. Now it is pretty common with these YZs, obviously there's a lot of components, these ramps and the pins will wear, and if they are a little bit too worn, then it can be very difficult to get these cylinders to close all the way. So that's what's happening in this case. This right side cylinder, it's not fully closing. It's only going to cost a tiny bit of power. For most people, you wouldn't even notice. If you're building this as a race engine, or if you really wanted to make sure that this engine was running as well as it possibly could, then I would go ahead and I would replace probably the 2 ramps and maybe even this top bracket to make sure that the pins themselves were fresh. As I mentioned before, this particular main flap here also has a piece missing from there. So in most cases, if a job that came through the workshop like that, I would go ahead and I would also replace this main flap. It's probably one of the only downsides of the YZ. It's a really good engine, but the Powervalve parts do need replacement from time to time. And the price can add up a little bit once you start replacing 3 or 4 individual components. But anyway, that's the job done. The only thing left now is to fit these side covers, which I may as well do straight away. And the other side, as I said before, the left side of the cylinder, so that's taken from when you're sitting on the bike, the left side of the cylinder here is the one that has this barb fitting, and you want it to point downwards. That's the breather hose for the whole Powervalve system. It's quite normal when you're running the bike as well, by the way, to have a little bit of exhaust gas coming out of this. Obviously this has a hose attached to it. Sometimes when you rev the bike, you'll see a little bit of, you know, some gases coming out of there. That's quite normal. It's just because the Powervalve system itself isn't perfectly sealed, so you do get a bit of exhaust gas ending up in this chamber here, and that fitting there is how it vents out and dissipates. Now I won't put this on, but the final piece of the puzzle is putting that front cover on. That has to happen before the cylinder gets reinstalled. If you're doing this with the engine still in the frame, you can't put this cover on once the cylinder goes back on, so you have to put this cover on first if you're doing a top-end rebuild with the engine in the frame. But I'll leave that off for the moment because I do need to replace this main flap. So there you go, that's a YZ250 Powervalve rebuild. Definitely one of the trickier Powervalves to rebuild. There's definitely a lot more parts to inspect and you know, and a few extra issues that can occur, but as I said, really good engine. And if you do that at each top-end rebuild, you know, strip it down and clean everything and rebuild it, you'll get a lot of life out of the engine. So thanks for watching.